Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Live from the Blue Seats. This is producer JL coming at you with another solo episode in our, little summer solo series. Hopefully, we'll have the rest of the crew on at some point down the line. But today is a big day in American history as it's July 4th, and we've declared our independence against Britain. And we like to indulge by eating a bunch of hot dogs in a pier in the middle of Brooklyn. Anyways, I hope you're all having a wonderful 4th of July with your family and friends or with your loved ones, and I hope that this is a very fruitful day for you. And if you're listening to this, thank you very much. We appreciate your listen. We appreciate your click. It's has been kind of a conflicting time here in Rangerstown, but we appreciate your listen. We appreciate your reads, and I'm sure everyone here at the site, including myself and Dave and Rob and Becky and everyone else, we appreciate it. So, this won't be long, clearly, because, it is a holiday after all. But obviously, the big news, is Jacob Trouba. We obviously can't skirt around that. Jacob Trouba, potentially looking to get traded. The New York Rangers were seemingly attempting to try and move him possibly to Detroit or maybe even a team like Utah. And I just say Utah because, they have the cap space for it. But obviously things have unfolded where, there's the New York Post article about Larry Brooks and basically outlining the fact that the Rangers have kind of deteriorated their relationship with Trouba, and the thing with his wife is her residency and him not really wanting to go. It kind of caused a stir online with many Ranger fans. And there is some frustration going on right now, all things considered. The team was basically 2 wins away from an Eastern Conference championship, and now to many it feels as if the roof is caved in. So let's kind of dissect it a little bit, because this seems to be a bit more layered than what many people think. It's a very tricky situation because first and foremost, he it doesn't seem as if he can really block anything. First and foremost, if he submitted his 15-team no trade, and let's say Detroit or Utah were a team that were not on that list, then it shouldn't be a problem, so to speak. But I think what happened was I think the New York Post article that kind of brought his wife into things just kind of really sort of added fuel to the fire. Obviously, Jacob Trouba has gone down in terms of quality of play, has seriously gone down in terms of just his effectiveness as a defenseman. Even though he does lay out a bunch of good hits, it seems as if he's been compromised by a lot of injuries. And not only that, but also just seemingly just out of position a lot. And that was pretty much evident in the playoffs when the Rangers couldn't really break out from their back end due to the lack of, control exhibited by Jacob Trouba and also by Eric Gustafsson. So it seems like all of this is compounding together to a fan base that is not only very rabid, but very passionate, very desperate. And I use the word desperate because I'm part of that. I want my team to win a Stanley Cup. I want the Rangers to win a Stanley Cup. A lot of us who've grown up with the Rangers, all we know are disappointment. A lot of the older fans that follow the team have seen 1994. I was only a year and 2 months alive when the Rangers won the Stanley Cup in 1994. And, while it's nice to, rewatch things and look back and kind of see how cool it was for people who were able to experience it back then, we don't have one of our own yet. We don't have that sort of summer where we can say, yeah, this is ours. We don't have that. So a lot of this is coming from really just a lot of us who are really sort of frustrated because you have a guy who is essentially making way too much money for the type of player that he is. And I will always reference that Rob basically would say that he was Winnipeg's Eric Gustafson, and he was shoehorned into a role that he was not suited for. And now we're beginning to see sort of kind of like the consequences of shoehorning him into that role. Um, but the one thing that I want to comment about too is that, you know, we have to kind of look at things in a certain way here. So I was sent this tweet by Michael Silvers at M7 1979 by someone from the blog, and he makes a good point. It says, if Jacob Trouba remains on the Rangers this season, will the fan base, on Twitter specifically, crap on him worse than Dan Girardi and Mark Stahl will ever crapped on? That's an interesting situation to talk about because um, I feel like a lot of the vitriol comes from having dealt with that sort of situation because, you know, on the onset, Stahl and Girardi, we loved them. They had a lot of playoff success here, but what ended up happening, obviously, they both broke down significantly. And even though Girardi had some semblance of success with Tampa Bay after the fact, it just they were pretty much basically done. And it hampered the Rangers' ability to really sign players, and it took them almost forever to really move on from Stahl's contract. Luckily Tampa Bay was able to, well, the Rangers bought out Girardi, you know, and Tampa Bay was able to get some mileage out of him towards the end. But having that had happened already through a lot of our, through the fans and us have seen that. I feel like what's happening now is it's like they don't want to have to go through that again. There's this very and I feel some of this in some way. And a lot of this is valid where we don't want to spend another 10 years wasting the prime of our future Hall of Fame goaltender. Because let's be real, Igor's going to make it to the Hall of Fame. We know it already. He's going to break, if he stays here long term, he's going to break numerous Ranger records. He's going to get close or even surpass Henrik. And he's going to, go up there as one of the better goalies to ever play for the franchise. And I think for a lot of us, we are frustrated with, you know, just the constant losing and pretty much falling short. And this, from a lot of people that I know, this season really did take a lot of wind out of our sails. Now, everyone has their choice. I'm going to obviously continue to watch. There are going to be some people who may not want to watch anymore. And look, that's okay. That's fine because, it's your choice. You do what you want to do. If you feel that you want to start watching at some point, sure. Obviously, there's going to be different labels to that, of course, but no one's forcing anyone to do anything, you know. But there is a significant amount of frustration. That's where a lot of this boils with the Jacob Trouba situation. And so another thing too is that with Trouba and the coming out of his wife's residency and, the fact that, it's essentially maybe forcing the Rangers, one, makes you think what exactly Chris Drury is doing. Now, I'm not going to say he's not doing anything, because clearly he's taken action with the Barclay Goodrow contract. And I personally think that Drury knows exactly what he needs to do because, again, I always like to say when there's smoke, there's fire. He clearly acknowledges that Jacob Trouba has not been the productive player that he should be. And that's definitely another fair criticism too. This is a business. And even though the contract that Trouba had was not given up by Drury himself, it was the previous regime that did it. Um, he still sees that that's really hampering the team. And look, listen, I like Jacob Trouba. I do. It sucks that his play has declined, but I like him as captain. I feel like when he's playing well, he can really contribute a lot to this team. When he's not playing compromised, when he's not playing with a busted wrist or playing with a broken ankle. I think one of the Robs brought it up in one of our chats. Trouba must have twisted something or twinged something up until December, or maybe something happened. But Trouba was actually playing pretty well with Keandre Miller And that was really sort of the catalyst for getting this team into the position that they were towards the end of the year. Because then what ended up happening was everything fell off a cliff. Igor started playing terribly. The defense was nowhere to be found. And it just kind of seemed like everything was, falling apart. And then Connor Mackey gets to the fight and the Rangers take off. But clearly there's an issue with Trouba, you know, Trouba kind of, how can I put this? He essentially, if he's hurt, obviously a hockey player is not going to say no. But I really think either he has to do it or the training staff has to kind of say, listen, you need to sit. Zach Jones was fitting in perfectly fine. Chad Ruedel was fitting in perfectly fine. The Rangers are winning games. There's this very selfish attitude when it comes to playing in hockey where, like, if you are that compromised, where you are, it's affecting your game severely, you need to sit. It's cool if a player comes in and he plays through an injury, and if he performs, that's great. But if he's playing through an injury and he doesn't perform, then you're not contributing. Therefore, you need to sit. And also just the severity of the injury too. You don't heal from a broken bone in 2 weeks. That's a lingering injury. So I don't believe it when they said that he was good to go, because clearly he looked compromised. Hockey, you need to rely on your lower body for that. But also in the same token, though, you know, um, these players have families, and they make these decisions, these big contract decisions, in conjunction with their wives or their significant others. And you know, the stark decline in his play really wasn't supposed to be expected. So all this would have been water under the bridge if Trouba had just played a little bit better. But um, I've seen a lot of things where there are people who've been attacking his wife, and um, I don't think that's fair. You know, um, you shouldn't use the player that you don't like as vitriol to attack somebody's wife just because they don't do what you want. Okay. These people have lives. They have things they want to do. Jacob Trouba is well within his contractual right to decline a trade if it's a team that he doesn't want to go to. And if he feels that he wants to do that with his wife, keep staying here for her residency and not going to a team that he doesn't want to go to, then he's well within his rights. The Rangers could still trade him to a team that is not on his 15-team no trade. So there's that. And here's another thing about the Post article. And Dave put out a really good piece about this, which I'm going to refer to. He mentions that Trouba cannot decline a trade to a team that is not on his 15 trade no list, on his no trade list. He cannot do that. That's the whole reason why the contract flips over at this point. So instead of it being a no trade clause, it's a 15-team no trade. So therefore, if there is no team that is on that list, there's no team on that list that the Rangers want to trade him to, he legally or like contractually cannot deny it. Dave makes a good point about the Post article being worded very carefully and very vaguely for a reason. A lot of what's happening with Trouba is just, like I said, it's poor luck and poor cap management. And then obviously, with the pandemic, the cap basically froze. Jacob Trouba was signed in 2019. And with the way that things were going, this $8 million would have been a scratch in the pan. It would have been manageable. But obviously, with COVID coming through, it really did hamper not only just the Rangers, but numerous teams. And there were really big shifts on a lot of rosters over the last 4 years. So it's something that, like Dave says, is just an unfortunate reality that both Trouba and Chris Drury need to navigate. So, if in some ways that Jacob Trouba ends up staying with the Rangers, me personally, I'm going to root for the guy, because honestly, it's really not about, this is going to sound very cliche, but it's really not about the name on the back. It's about the team on the front. And am I going to be frustrated? Of course I'm going to be frustrated. It was really hard watching those playoff series, and watching Jacob Trouba fumble over himself. And it pains me because, again, I like Trouba when he's healthy and a productive player, because he can really contribute a lot to a team. But if this is going to get to the point where this is going to become a pattern, then he does not belong here. But at the same token, just because you don't like him doesn't mean you have to attack his wife and his family. I think it's a bit much that a lot of those details about his wife and his family kind of got publicized. I don't think it should have been. Um, so it kind of just goes into, goes into the question of the Post and, their questionable antics, which is not the first time they've done this. Again, the New York Post is kind of a rag, and I'm not one to besmirch publications, but I think everyone's in agreement. And, Larry Brooks is essentially sort of a mouthpiece for the organization. So maybe it's either the organization feeding him this news or it's Brooks just trying to play up nice to the GM so he can get more scoops. Either way, that Post article is just trouble. And the Rangers have known to keep things tightly lipped for a lot of things. And they only tell you what they want what they want people to hear. So I maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you can come back to this and tell me that I'm wrong, that I'm stupid or whatever. But just judging off of Chris Drury's track record and how he's gone about things, I wholeheartedly think that there is still something in the works. Now, look, I understand that the free agent period was a bit underwhelming. Look, I get that. And that's probably another thing that's adding to the frustration here. I understand that it's been very underwhelming. They traded for Riley Smith, which, newsflash, is something this team needs. There are people who don't like this move, and I just have to say why. I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm going to agree with every Rangers move and trade possible because I'm just not that kind of guy. But Riley Smith is a guy that, I mean, honestly, should have been here already. Should have been here for this playoff run. I think maybe they should have found a way to get a second and a fifth, and I'm sure Pittsburgh would have had no problem retaining money, you know, depending on whether it would have fit in the cap or not. Maybe it didn't. I don't have the cap numbers in front of me, but let's just to say that it didn't fit. But either way, that's the kind of trade that it should have made uh in the trade deadline instead of in July. But that's beside the point. So now, just moving over to the free agent acquisitions, and it's going to tie in together, is that they signed Sam Carrick, who is essentially going to be a Barclay Goodrow replacement or just someone who's going to be able to fill in from time to time. And then obviously trading for Riley Smith and a couple of guys who are probably going to end up in Hartford. So it has been kind of inactive for the Rangers. And then you see all these other guys going for other deals, like Toffoli and, Eric Brandstrom, Steven Stamkos, all these guys, signing crazy amounts of money for players that are not really worth it. And my take is this on that. Right now, excuse me, sorry. It's been a long day. I'm sorry for yawning in your ear. The Rangers next season are going to have a bit of a pickle because now you have to basically look at Igor, Alexei Lafreniere, and Keandre Miller, and maybe even Braden Schneider at some point. So do you think it would be right for the Rangers to essentially acquire someone at a high contract in exchange for maybe pushing out one of those guys? The Rangers have to be smart about this. Now, look, we've definitely criticized a lot of the guys on this team currently with their play. Mika, Kreider, the two main culprits, maybe more Mika than anything. The defense has had trouble breaking out, which has caused a lot of problems. But to say that they're going to run it back and, run the same roster out there like they did last season is wholeheartedly incorrect. Because Wenberg is gone. Wenberg's with San Jose now. Jack Roslovic doesn't seem like he's coming back. He's still a free agent as the time of recording this. And then the Rangers are going to essentially let some of the kids play on the bottom six, which is what we kind of wanted at some point. Good organizations let their kids play and they make an impact. Okay. And for years, the Rangers have never had that sort of luxury. Why do you think teams like Boston, Tampa Bay, even Florida are allowed to not only move on from certain types of players, but also just keep their winning ways in a sustainable fashion because they get people who fit the style that they want to play, who are young, and they shoehorn them into their team. And then from there, they grow. Perfect example is Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay was still able to be competitive after losing Barclay Goodrow and Blake Coleman. You know, and they were able to find a way to still be competitive with some of the guys that they had in the minor leagues. So, we want to see Othman, we want to see Berard. Berard is probably, probably the better one out of the crop. He's a good 5-on-5 guy. So, signing a bunch of second and I think the only two players in my mind, at least in this free agency, that were probably merited the Rangers for somewhat of an overpay would have been Jonathan Marchessault and Steven Stamkos. Other than that, no one was really worth the crazy amounts of money that they were throwing out. It was announced that the salary cap was going to go up, that more teams had a bunch of space, and, to each their own. You're going to spend the money that you want. But if the Rangers want to continue to change things in the organization and kind of follow the footsteps of like Tampa Bay, you got to give your kids a chance. They got to learn at some point. I mean, we're just going to keep them in Hartford for all this time and just continue to sign. That's essentially signing all these vets for crazy amount of money is the same thing that Glenn Sather did back in the day, and everybody hated him for it. So why should the Rangers get stuck with these contracts of players that are not worth it? And it's not like this team is not going to be good. They're going to be awesome next year. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm going to record this on July 4th and they're going to be absolutely terrible. But I refuse to believe that team with so much talent up front and even on the back end, worst case scenario, even with Jacob Trouba on the back end, I refuse to believe that this team is not going to be competitive. The legitimate gripe that I have with you, for those who are feeling a bit iffy, is whether or not they're able to cruise past teams in the playoffs. Now, here's the thing about the playoffs. The playoffs are a giant crapshoot because you can have a team like the Tampa Bay Lightning, like the New York Rangers, who win franchise leading amount of games. Rangers were essentially not too far off from a franchise record when wins. Win the President's Trophy. Tampa Bay, was one of the better teams in history on paper that year. And Tampa Bay gets beat in the first round by the Columbus Blue Jackets. The Rangers went a little bit further, going to the conference final, which is a massive improvement over getting swept in the first round by the Devils. So anything can happen in the playoffs. And then there's also the trade deadline. Maybe they reinforce. Maybe they find a way to play harder, tougher, bigger. And that's not even about size. It's just about the style of play that they, do. And there's more than enough talent on this team. You're not looking to get a crazy skilled winger because you have it already in Alexis Lafreniere. So moves like Riley Smith, a move like a second or third pair defenseman, a move like another depth defenseman, and maybe another forward for the bottom six. That's what they need to do. People who can dig in. And obviously next season, Filip Chytil's going to have a chance to play healthy. He's going to get a chance on presumably the third line. We already know that the Panarin, Trocheck, Lafreniere line is going to be line number one, clearly because of their performance in the playoffs. Mika Kreider and presumably Riley Smith will be line number two. And that's a perfect, it looks like it's going to be a perfect fit. So to think that the Rangers are going to just totally not be in the mix of things is completely asinine. And not only that, even if you're running Jacob Trouba back out there, you're still going to find a way to win games. At this point, what they would need to do is find the guy who can help assist him on his weaknesses. And that is something that good teams are able to do if they aren't able to move the contract that they're trying to move. So there's a lot of layers to this Trouba situation because it does immediately impact a lot of decision making because he is so much tied up in his cap. So honestly, going after his wife because of this, that's scum. Don't do that. Okay. Being upset that he's taken up a bunch of money on the cap, that's understandable. But to do the personal tax and talk to his wife, talk about his wife, no chance. So it's just been very tense. And I'm sure a lot of what I've just said just kind of seems thrown together. And I apologize if it does. But um, it's just been kind of frustrated because um, it seems as if it's just strange, things have gotten crazy to the point where it's being talked about as a big news on WFAN. And the only time the Rangers ever really get mentioned are when they're playing really well, like they did last season in the President's Trophy or in the playoffs. So the fact that a summer story was basically talked about on WFAN is like a prime story, it's insane. And, if you're someone who is like me, who is online a lot, and you see a lot of takes involving all this, it's just kind of mind numbing because, you know, I understand the frustration of everything, but this team is still really good. So they may have a good regular season, but anything can happen in the playoffs. Maybe I'm being overly positive about this. Maybe I'm just, blindly optimistic about things, but I'm aware of the shortcomings of this team. But there have been worse teams that have gone into the playoffs with worse players and have won the Stanley Cup. For years, you had a lot of teams with inferior goaltenders come in and beat the Rangers, and Henrik Lundqvist was basically denied a cup, on many occasions. So it's not a given. Heck, maybe they'll have a crappy regular season and then just eke into the playoffs and maybe do well. Or maybe they have another good regular season, win another huge amount of games and then they lose in the playoffs, just short of a Stanley Cup. Who the heck knows? But either way, this Trouba situation is just something else. And, you know, maybe and Dave kind of alludes to this towards the end. Maybe this is kind of like a silver lining. So maybe that means that if we have to keep him for another season, then maybe, just maybe, he continue to have a reduced role. Maybe he doesn't be as stubborn in terms of his injuries. And then maybe they find someone to help supplement him and actually maybe take him out of being a shutdown defenseman. You know, you have to treat it very sensitively in that sense. Now, in terms of just, the relationship with Drury and Trouba, nobody knows. Apparently the players are upset about how it's handled, especially with the Goodrow thing too. But this is what I'll say. Peter Laviolette has the pulse of his players. And I'm sure that once they get back together, he'll, you know, dissuade any sort of, dissension amongst the ranks because, this team is there's not really a leader on the team outside of Trouba and maybe Goodrow when he was here that can really like stand up and do something. The Rangers don't have that Messier type of leader. So that's what you have to get out of your coach, essentially. You get that sort of leadership out of Peter Laviolette. And it worked because he did get the best out of a lot of his players. Bartemi Panarin had a career year. Keandre Miller was emerging, as a superstar defenseman for this team. Adam Fox continued his just awesome play as a defenseman. Alexis Lafreniere turned out to be a huge, huge improvement under Peter Laviolette. And also the coaching staff too. So it's very multifaceted, and you can't just it's not as simple as it looks. And again, there is still time. As I'm recording this on July 4th, there is definitely time for the Rangers to make improvements. All signs point to them looking for the second tier free agents who are still pretty good in their own right, but can supplement the high end skill that this team already possesses. So while I understand the frustration, there's going to be a new hockey season coming up in the next couple of months. And, if you want to come on the ride, great. We'd love to have you. If not, you know what? That's your choice. And again, I'm not going to discredit anybody. I'm frustrated just as much as the next person. But at the end of the day, there's no point in moping in the past. It's whatever's right in front of you. You just hope for the best, and then you just take it from there. That's it. Again, maybe I'm being overly positive, but who knows? Anyways, so that's more of enough of me late night rambling right now. Um, Obviously, there'll probably be more coming out within the next couple of weeks. Like I said, I absolutely refuse to believe that Chris Drury is not trying to get this situation resolved, because he works very quickly and he is very ruthless in how he deals with things. So to think that just because he got humiliated publicly, that he's just going to stop. No, I still think that he's actively trying to find a solution on how to fix this. You know, even though Chris Drury may not be the greatest GM of all time, I at least know that his awareness level is up, because he's really trying to improve the quality of this team. And Jacob Trouba clearly has not played up to the contract that he signed. And obviously, Jacob Trouba is legally allowed to block a trade to a team on his list, but he's also not allowed to block a team that's not on that list. But you can't fault the man for, having his motivations to stay in a place where he enjoys, makes $8 million, and is able to live in a place where his wife is able to work. It's just a messy situation, and everybody can feel the way that they want. But there's definitely there's more time, and let's see what happens. Anyways, thank you again for listening to this short episode of Live from the Blue Seats. We're going to definitely have more content throughout the summer. Hopefully soon we'll be able to talk more about the draft picks that the Rangers had in the NHL draft. Maybe get Will Wright on, maybe Rob will come back on, who knows? But we're going to try and get that to you soon. If not, we'll just get more of, producer JL commenting on what's going on, and obviously when training camp comes around and we head into the fall, we'll be back to our regularly scheduled programming with the rest of the crew. And, we might get a full crew within the next couple of weeks or so as well, just to kind of change things around. But anyways, thank you for listening. Feel free to follow us on socials, follow the crew. They put out great content, they put a lot of their heart and soul into this. They're very passionate about talking about the Rangers, and it's all really good stuff. So if you already do, we appreciate that. If not, then, give us a click, give us a like, and give us a listen. Follow us on socials, take a listen to our older podcasts if you like. And with that being said, if you're listening to this on the 4th of July, I hope you have a wonderful holiday. If you're an American, if you are outside of the country, I hope you have a wonderful regular day. Anyways, this is producer JL signing off for another episode of Live from the Blue Seats, and we'll talk to you next week. Let's go Rangers.